this computer. Oh, blimey. Okay, there you go. So recording this computer, that's good. And I will hand over to Amy, and she can basically make a start, because I think there's enough people here now. Throughout the session, in the next 10 minutes, no doubt people will join us. So I'll just let them in. So don't be surprised that people pop up, Amy, throughout in the last next few minutes.
No, that's fine. That's great.
I'll hand over to you.
Cool. Yeah, no, thanks for having me. That was a very nice introduction. And I am going to share my screen. This is hoping this works. Can you see my screen?
Yep, see that?
Someone give me a thumbs up. You can see it. Okay, great. Can you still see it okay? If I change slides, that's working and stuff.
Yep, no problem.
Brilliant. Okay. Yeah, no, so thanks so much for having me. I'm going to talk a little bit about design systems. This is a talk that I have given before, so sorry if it seems a little bit formal at any point. I will try and sort of talk like a normal human being, but I gave this at a conference either earlier this year or last year. It all blends into one at this point. So yes, do kind of stop me if anything doesn't make sense. I will make sure there's plenty of time for questions and stuff at the end. But so yeah, as Giles mentioned, my name's Amy, and I am, at the moment, I'm working as a self-employed design systems and content design consultant. And I'm currently working with the Springer Nature Group. Some of you might have heard of them. They're a big kind of scientific research publishing organisation. And I'm working with them on their design system, which is obviously what I'm going to talk about today. But I know that this group has kind of focused on career changing. So I thought it was sort of worth starting off by explaining that actually the first bit of my career was spent doing something completely different. I actually started out working as a kind of researcher, writer and editor at Which, the sort of consumers association that do the reviews and Best Buys and all that sort of thing. And I spent 6 years working there and worked across a pretty sort of broad range of product areas. So things like compost, spiralizers, energy companies, lawnmowers even, and the property market, and even Christmas puddings, which is a big highlight for me. And I did actually make it into the magazine once as well. So this is my embarrassing picture of me in the Which magazine. So this is, yeah, super candid shot from a news story in Which Gardening in 2015, I think, about out-of-date compost on sale in garden centres, which was a real scandal. So yeah, I was pretty happy with myself when I unearthed that one. Oh God, I forgot I'd left that pun in the speaker notes. So sorry about that. But anyway, so, oh God, my cat's gonna come in. Sorry, she makes a noise. She's quite loud. So yeah, at the end of 2016, I left Which and left behind that career in sort of hard-hitting journalism. And I went to work at the Government Digital Service, or GDS. Oh God, sorry, my cat's being very loud.
Don't worry, we've all got cats. I'm sure they'll...
Okay, she'll be quiet in a minute. So I don't know if you've heard of GDS, but for those of you who aren't familiar with it, it's part of the Cabinet Office, and it's kind of best known for building and maintaining gov.uk, which is the website that hosts information about the UK government and guidance for citizens. And it also brings together information and also services into one place. So things like tax a vehicle, or register to vote, or apply for a passport, or even report treasure. There's a service for reporting treasure if you're lucky enough to find some. So yeah, I worked at GDS for 3 years, from the beginning of 2017 until the end of last year. And when I joined them, I went to work in this big sort of multidisciplinary product team with designers and developers and researchers, and this is us. And we're looking very pleased with ourselves because that day we'd launched this, which is the Gov.uk design system. And I'm going to talk a lot more about that in the next few minutes. But suffice to say that I really loved my time there. And I became really interested in design systems in general. And so much so that when I left GDS at the end of 2019, I went to go and work on another one. So then the next one was for a healthcare tech company called Babylon Health, which again, you might have heard of. It's a sort of a startup that does things like GP video conferencing and that kind of thing. And I worked on the design system there as a product manager this time, and helped them to launch it and start to scale it across their organization. And after that, I went to work for the one at the BT Group, which is a multi-brand design system, because BT owns BT, EE and PlusNet. Can't actually show you a picture of that one because it doesn't exist kind of publicly yet, but I was working there as a product owner and leading a team of about 10 to design and deliver it. And yeah, so now I'm at the Springer Nature Group. Definitely no picture of that one because it's in its sort of very early stages right now. But that's just a sort of whistle-stop tour of my career and how I've kind of ended up working in this space. And I'm going to talk a little bit more detail now about design systems and the value that they bring to organizations.
Hey, can I just ask you a quick question? So
yeah,
what you presented so far is obviously quite diverse in terms of companies you've worked in.
Yeah.
What led you from gov.uk to Babylon Health? Was it literally you'd done your job at gov.uk and you wanted, and you just sort of put yourself out there and they just headhunted you, or was it you were looking for a different industry?
Yeah, so a bit of all of the above, really. So I kind of, I made the decision I wanted to start trying to work as a kind of independent consultant before I left GDS. Because often, you know, with contracting, people are looking for someone to start pretty much straight away. So I knew I wouldn't have the luxury to kind of get something lined up and then hand my notice in. So I handed my notice in October, and then I had a few months to try and find something. And I was also quite interested at that point in moving from content design to product management. So I thought, if I'm going to change careers and I'm going to go from permanent to being self-employed, then I would like to keep at least one thing the same. So I knew that I wanted to kind of stay working in design systems, and I contacted a few people that I knew, and one of them was a guy who I'd worked with a little bit in government on the gov.uk design system, who I knew was working at Babylon, and just said, you know, what's it like? Do they have a design system? Do they want one? And yeah, the timing just kind of worked out really well. They were hiring a product owner at the time. So yeah, so I went to talk to them and had a very frightening kind of interview where they just asked me if I could come and talk about design systems. And then I realized I was basically doing a kind of live interview to about 40 people, which was not an experience I'd like to repeat. But yeah, that was how it all sort of came about. Great. I don't know if, oh yes, you are there.
Sorry, I was on mute because my dishwasher's going off, so I was no, great, carry on. Sorry.
Cool. Okay. So design systems. So some of you, I guess, might have a bit of an understanding of design systems, and some of you might not be so familiar with them. But I will say that whatever camp you fall into, your definition might be different from mine, because it does vary, and what people think design systems are is something that's a source of endless debate in this kind of area. So I thought I would just start by kind of giving you my definition of what design systems are, so that we can just make sure that we're on the same page as I sort of talk through these slides. And the best way I thought to do that would be just to walk you through the gov.uk design system, which is where it all kind of started for me. So before gov.uk existed, some of you might remember this, there were hundreds of different government websites, and they all had pretty different identities, and it made it quite hard to know whether you were really on an official government website or not. A lot of them looked a little bit weird and a bit dodgy. And then in 2012, GDS launched gov.uk as the single website for UK government services and information. And gov.uk has got a really clear, consistent identity. So this hopefully looks kind of quite familiar to you. And it means that when you travel through different parts of gov.uk, it looks and works in a way that's recognisable and familiar and easy to use. And maintaining this sort of visual and functional identity is something that's really important for trust. But it's also really challenging too, because even though gov.uk is designed to look and feel like one website to its users, it is actually designed and delivered by hundreds of different service teams from 25 different ministerial departments, and they are based all around the UK, occasionally beyond, and they're all working independently and at the same time, and often to sort of pretty tight budgets and deadlines. So our big challenge in our team when I joined was, how can we help those teams to try and deliver usable and accessible services that look and feel like gov.uk should, when the reality behind the scenes might be more like this, with parts of the same service being delivered by different departments. And so, yeah, one of the ways that we help to solve this problem is with the design system that my team and I built. So this is what it looks like, and it is actually publicly available, so you can go and have a look at it for yourself. It's at gov.uk/design-system. If you just Google gov.uk design system, there you'll find it. And it's where GDS documents design guidelines and kind of common solutions to start with when designing or building government services. So it has things like styles for colours, typography, lists and links, that sort of thing. And it also includes common user interface elements, so things like buttons and form inputs and error messages and all the sorts of things you might interact with when you're using gov.uk. And as well as that, it also includes sort of slightly higher level design patterns, which we defined as kind of repeatable solutions for common tasks and page types. So that would be things like how to ask a user for their name, or how to help them create an account. But yeah, this website that I'm showing you now, this is just one part of the design system. And design systems typically aren't just static products that kind of set these standards and give guidance. As the name sort of indicates, they're whole systems with tools and processes that help teams to use and contribute to them. So in the gov.uk design systems case, it also includes a front-end code library called gov.uk front-end, which lets developers use the design systems components and standards in production. And for designers, there's something called the gov.uk prototype kit, which lets you build high fidelity prototypes using design system components and styles. So something to point out here is that in government, they encourage designers to prototype in code. So I should stress it's definitely not production ready code, but it's kind of HTML, CSS and a bit of JavaScript. And the idea is that it facilitates better user research, because you can test with real services that people can kind of interact with, and it feels a lot more like a real service, and so we get sort of better quality insights from that.
So Amy, as a team, did you have front enders specifically employed by the design system team to deliver these components?
Yes, we did. Yeah, so we had it was a really sort of mixed team in terms of discipline. So we had I think at the biggest we had maybe 6 front-end developers. We also had I can't remember because the team size sort of fluctuated a lot while I was there, but maybe sort of 3 designers, I think, 1 or 2 content designers. We had a tech writer, product manager, delivery manager. So yeah, it was a real sort of multidisciplinary effort. But yeah, we have front-end developers who were working on the design system and working on these components. But it wasn't just our team sort of building the stuff that went in the design system, and I will get onto that in a second. So yeah, these are kind of just the most visible bits of the design system, that, you know, the artifacts that you can see if you're kind of browsing through it. But really just as important as these are also the communities of practice that form around it, and the different sort of processes and touch points that let people outside of the central design system team contribute to it. So to make sure that the design system incorporated all of the latest research and design and development work from across government, it also has an open contribution process, which means that anyone in government can contribute to it. Actually, anyone outside of government can contribute to it too, but primarily it tends to be people kind of working in gov. And so to support that process, the gov.uk design system enlists the support of a cross-government working group who meet kind of, I don't actually know how it's run now since I've left, but at the time I was there, they used to meet once a month to assess any sort of external contributions and to help make sure that everything the design system contains meets the needs of the very, very large audience that has to use it. So I hope that kind of makes a bit of sense, and that quick tour of the GovUK design system gives you a clearer picture of what they are. But I think it's kind of important to talk about why we have them as well, and the value that they bring. So for me, I think there are kind of three main benefits to design systems. So when they're implemented and run effectively and properly funded, that's really important. Design systems can help to drastically reduce the amount of waste in the product design and development workflow for an organization. And they can also help to support continuous improvements of products and services for the teams that use them. And they can also improve agility. So they help to make organizations more resilient to change. I am going to talk through these in more detail, so that's not all you're getting. So the first one, reduce waste. So at the kind of most simple level, design systems exist to solve the common problems centrally and to make those solutions to those common problems reusable, so that teams who are kind of working directly on products and services can focus on the unique challenges that they're facing. So just to understand what that looks like in practice, it's kind of helpful to think about how these inefficiencies in the design and development workflow occur in the first place, and how quickly they can scale if they're not reined in. So I'm going to walk through a super simple example, which is I have pinched from a design systems consultant called Nathan Curtis, who, if you're interested in this area, is definitely worth having a little read of his stuff, because he's written pretty much everything there is to know about design systems and published it. So yeah, using a super simple example of a button, which is we think of as a really kind of straightforward UI element, which is just basically some text on a background shape that you can click. And it does something. But buttons actually encapsulate a number of an organization's kind of fundamental design decisions which cut across its products. So we've got things like border radius, and then it's background color, it's margin, then there's the text color and the typography and padding. And even though they might seem sort of fairly inconsequential and, you know, not that big of a deal, getting company-wide agreement on any of these things, particularly in a very big organization, is something that usually takes quite a lot of time and careful kind of coordination to get everybody to agree on it. And to complicate things further, we also have to think about different button states beyond just the kind of default static state. We might be thinking about things like, what does a hover state look like? What happens when someone focuses on the button? What do we want to have a disabled button state? Generally, we didn't kind of consider that great practice, but some organizations need them and use them. So there's that to think about. And then we'll also usually have to think about different button styles. So most organizations have more than one type of button across their websites and applications. So even gov.uk, which is pretty minimal in its design, has primary and secondary buttons. And again, creating each of these styles is something that takes time, and trying to get an organization full of designers and developers to agree on a standard approach to them is something that requires lots of effort. And our products might also incorporate different size buttons as well. So for different page layouts, or to try and create kind of hierarchy in pages, like if we want something to really stand out, we might make a slightly bigger button. And then we also have to think about different button types. So for instance, we might want to add icons as well as text to our buttons, or we might want to use an icon only button. We might even want to create buttons for drop-down menus that reveal a list of options, or even kind of split a button to support two related actions like replying or selecting from a list of alternatives like forwarding or something. So to add to that, we might also have to think about different backgrounds. So how does our button work on like dark mode, for example, or within different product themes that are in use? And none of what I'm talking about is particularly excessive. This is pretty standard. So if we think about the people building these buttons, if we've got a small team working on buttons as part of a new product or feature, and that team includes a designer and an engineer and a QA tester, at a conservative guess, that team's probably going to cost the organisation about £100 an hour. And if we think that it takes that team about 200 hours of combined effort to design, build and test this system of buttons, accounting for all of the different states and variants and themes that I've just talked about, which is not uncommon, like I say, at £100 an hour, that's going to cost 20 grand. And if you have 50 teams across your organization making buttons for different product areas and marketing sites and applications, which again is definitely not sort of unfathomable at a large enterprise, that's going to cost you £1 million to have good buttons. And so without a design system to act as this kind of single source of truth, you'll see significant inconsistency and also variation in quality across your product landscape as well. So it's expensive, it results in inconsistency, and it can impact the sort of user experience. So this is really not good. And I've only talked about buttons in this example, but when you start to think about all of the other design elements that make up a user interface and user journeys, and the different contexts that get created from scratch each time they're needed in the absence of having a central design system or a central point of reference, then you can see this very, very quickly becomes an incredibly expensive operation, and no one wants that. So what design systems do is just drastically reduce that down, or in best cases, they eliminate it altogether. Yes.
Quick question, Amy. So you're saying that it costs a lot of money to create buttons, basically?
Yeah, big time.
Which is I think a lot of us will understand. Absolutely makes a lot of sense for the variety of it. You'll hear expressions such as tech debt and design debt and reworking stuff, and having a good design system will counter all these things. Did you? I mean, you suppose you were lucky enough in a way, or unlucky, maybe you can divulge, to be working for a company such as government. Sorry, but a lot of the designers are working for small companies. So if you got to turn around and say to them, yeah, doing your buttons is going to cost you, obviously not $1 million, of course, because not all companies are as big as government, of course, but how do you go about getting buy-in for stakeholders that don't quite understand what you're trying to do? Because fundamentally, you've got to release the purse strings to get the work done.
Yeah, absolutely. So, I mean, this is a kind of ever-present question in design systems land, and it's very difficult. Like, I won't pretend that it's something that's easy to do. Lots of organizations are still sort of trying to make the case for a design system. In fact, even, the client I'm working with now, part of what I'm doing is trying to sort of demonstrate the potential value of it. I think that walking them through the buttons example, like I just did with you, but with examples of their buttons, is sometimes quite an enlightening thing to do with stakeholders when you present them with, you kind of confront them with how much money they're throwing down the drain over these things. I mean, the example I just gave, even one team, we could expect to be spending maybe 20 grand worth of time and effort on buttons. So even though lots of teams won't scale to a full sort of £1 million if it's not a very large organisation, it can still cost a lot of money. And obviously in smaller organisation, that's relatively sort of more of their income. So kind of helping them to understand what it really means in practice and where those inefficiencies are occurring. And I think often, like the approach that we're taking now, which I think is fairly common, is a case of kind of doing a little bit, like to show the value of a design system. So maybe just getting 2 teams using it to start with and showing how that saved time and effort. And then once you've kind of proved your point and you've done a good sort of proof of concept, then you can start to scale it more as you sort of build trust and buy-in. But yeah, it's definitely not easy. And there's sort of lots of talk about this. You'll see lots of articles and stuff online about how to get buy-in for a design system. So yeah, it's hard.
Great, thank you, Karen.
Cool. So yes, design systems basically create a single source of truth for design, usage guidance, and code to try and stop that siloed working and to try and reduce waste in the design and development process. So the second point I made was that design systems support continuous improvement. And they do that by taking care of the common problems. So by reducing duplication of effort and creating a single source of truth for people to find answers to the common challenges that designers and developers in an organization share, design systems increase the speed with which we can design and build and test new products and features. And obviously, the faster we can build and test new products and features, the quicker we can learn from the real experience of users and customers. So this is maybe the most obvious and, in my personal humble opinion, least interesting way that design systems support continuous improvement. Loads of people have said stuff about that. So I'm going to talk about a different one, which is with a central design system, we can centralize the knowledge and the experience of the teams in our organization and use that to kind of continually improve standards for everyone. So again, I'm just going to jump into an example here. So this is my team at Babylon Health. And when this photo was taken, we had just launched the design system for Babylon, which is why we're all so smiley. And it was called DNA because it's basically the law that design systems have to be given names that make them sound like a team off of The Apprentice. And the first version contained a sort of fairly kind of simple and lean set of brand guidelines, some components and some content guidance based on what teams were already using. So before DNA existed, teams at Babylon were working from various different design and code libraries to try and design and build their products. But the problem was just that there were a lot of them and they were split across different spaces and tools. So for our first release of DNA, our focus had really just been about bringing everything together in one place to try and stem the flow of different versions and to try and consolidate our resources down into one central place. But once we'd done that, our next step was to try and make it better. So having successfully centralized everything, we now had to focus on kind of raising the standard and improving the quality of our products across the board. And so we wanted to make sure that our components were accessible, responsive, and kind of adherent to the Babylon brand, and also flexible enough to be used across different platforms and partner products that Babylon supported. And there was a lot of work to do to get things to that point. So we started to just slowly pick through the components one by one and to try and review and improve them. And our designer, our developer, and our content designer, we were quite a small team, worked really closely together to research, design, and document and rebuild the basics of our UI from the ground up, with a real focus on making them simple and scalable and accessible. But we actually didn't get that far into that process before our colleagues at Babylon wanted to know more about what we were doing. And so we'd get questions from teams wanting to know when the new components would be ready, so they'd know whether they should wait and include them in their next release or push ahead and update them later. So we'd get feedback from designers and developers about bugs and issues with existing components, and we would also get requests to contribute new components or improve existing ones. And we started to realize that reworking these components through a closed process in our team, we were really missing out on an opportunity to build awareness and build support for the design system and to get that valuable insight that would improve those components and those patterns. So we started to think about how we could open it up. And unlike at GDS, we didn't have a team big enough to support a really large scale comprehensive contribution model. And we also couldn't necessarily support contribution reactively in response to people coming to us and saying, could I contribute this alongside the work we were already doing to try and build out the design system. And so we started to run these weekly sessions called Atomic Thursdays, with each week being dedicated to reviewing and improving a single component. So we advertised the sessions internally each week, telling people what we were going to focus on so they would know whether it was relevant or not. And in the sessions, we'd usually hear from designers and developers who were using the components day to day about how we should improve them based on their actual user experience. And we'd have representatives there from our team who understood how to systematize them. And then we'd also invite in experts in content, accessibility, engineering, and visual design who would provide feedback using their subject matter knowledge. And so through this process, we not only made our components richer and more representative, but we also created this space and this forum to share knowledge and to learn from each other. And so this process of designing the open didn't only improve the standard of Babylon's products, but it also increased the knowledge and skills of the individuals in our organization. And so when I talk about design systems supporting continuous improvement, I want to just stress this isn't just about the improvement of our outputs and our products, but it's also about the improvement of our organization as a whole and the teams that work within it. And so now I'm just going to move on to my final point, which is that design systems improve agility. And one of the best ways that I can think of to bring this concept to light is with this slightly nerdy concept called design tokens, which some of you might have heard about. And if we were all in a big conference hall right now, I can see your faces, I would try and ask for a show of hands to find out who's heard of design tokens. But if all of you put your hand up, you would also ruin the next few minutes of my talk. So since I can't do that, anyway, I'm going to cater to those of you who might not have heard of tokens and explain how they work. So design tokens are essentially kind of named entities that are used in place of raw values to define and distribute the foundational layer of our UI design, which sounds very, very unclear, given that my job is to try and clarify things and be a wordsmith. I'll make it make sense. So without tokens, when we want to create a standard style for something like a button, for example, we'd have to decide various things about it. So some of the stuff I talked through earlier, like what colors it should be, as an example. And we would usually define that as a raw value. So for colors, something called a hex value or an RGB. And when a developer wants to follow that style in the product they're working on, what they'll do is they'll look at those raw values and they'll copy them into their production version of the button. And what that means is that there's no actual link between the values that we've stipulated in our design system documented button style and the button that is being used in production. So each of those buttons in production is maintained separately. And then if we want to change the color, for example, then it has to be done manually in every product which uses that type of button, which is really expensive, time consuming, all the things that design systems are trying to stop from happening. So with tokens, what we can do is create links, which helps us keep those things in sync more easily. And we do that by working in layers. So at the very first layer, we would just give a name to those raw values. So for the color that I just showed, instead of saying that it's hex 494A4C, we would give it a name like brand charcoal, for example. And then from there, we can associate the color name with what it represents. So we know that brand charcoal, in our example, is our brand's primary color. So we might want to call it brand primary or something like that. And then from there, we can make specific design decisions about how to use those colors in practice and associate them with these lower level tokens. So in the example of our button, we want it to use the brand primary color. So for its background, we'll set our button background color as brand primary. And so in this world, when a developer creates a button, they can now do it using centrally defined and maintained design tokens rather than those raw values. And then the token that they've used travels back up those layers to find the original values and picks it out and uses it in what it is that they're working on. So this might be a bit complex and a bit technical if you've not come across tokens before, but what's really important is the implications of it. So using tokens, what it means is that we can define and distribute our design decisions automatically across our products, making everything much more unified and much easier to update. So if we suddenly decided tomorrow that actually we want to change all of our products' primary buttons from charcoal to red, then we just update the token, and then the developers could run an update which rolls out those changes across all of the products using tokens. And I've only talked about colors here, but this is an example from the Salesforce design system team, which shows the breadth of what tokens can do. So they can also be used to define things like fonts, opacity, and line heights and spacing and radius and layouts and all sorts of things. And they can also be created in a way that lets them be used across different platforms and distributed directly into design tools so that designers and developers can work from a single source of truth. And so in this way, tokens can be used to define and maintain lots of foundational design things, which can help us to really kind of increase the efficiency of our product design and development work and introduce large scale changes to our brand more easily. And by codifying and systematizing those building blocks of our design like this, it frees us up to think about the new challenges when we're presented with them. And I think this is kind of a really nice place to finish up, because all of us have faced a really real need to be able to do that over the past 18 months. This guy. So when the COVID pandemic took hold and much of the world went into lockdown, the demand on our digital services grew really quickly and exponentially. and experiences which might have been sort of passable and acceptable in a pre-COVID world where offline channels were maybe more readily available to support them were really no longer viable. And so organisations providing offline services had to quickly create digital alternatives. And this was no time to be negotiating those basic design decisions. And so I'm going to share two examples of organisations who were able to mobilise quickly by leaning on their design systems. So the first one is Barnardo's. So Barnardo's, some of you might know, is the oldest children's charity in the UK. And it's about 150 years old, and it's got around 30,000 staff and volunteers working for it. And given its size and the fact it's a charity and its age, agility is maybe not a characteristic that we would associate with Barnardo's. But back in 2016, Barnardo's launched a strategy to design and deliver the next generation of children's health and social care. And part of that strategy was building a design system. And like most design systems, it includes reusable design assets and UI components, design patterns and standards and principles and guidance. So if we fast forward to 2020, and Barnardo's, like everyone else, faced an unprecedented challenge. Like many organisations, Barnardo's had to quickly find alternatives to the face-to-face services that it offered. And one of the ways that it did this was by introducing a new online service called See, Hear, Respond. And this service is funded by the Department for Education, and it's delivered by a coalition of charities led by Barnardo's to provide much needed support to children who are falling through the cracks of our existing systems. So it works with schools and other agencies to find children who are kind of hidden from view and who are currently not really receiving support from statutory organisations, and those who are at risk of experiencing, adverse impact to their mental health and well-being. So the Barnardo's See, Hear, Respond service was designed and delivered in just 3 weeks. And since it launched, at the time that I wrote this talk, it's probably more now, it had been used for over 10,000 referrals. So this wouldn't have been possible without the design system. And so I'm just going to return to where I started, looking at gov.uk. So keep in mind that although government's digital services might need to vary a bit in terms of content and underlying policy, the structure and the UI elements can often be reused. So most public services have a pretty simple and common structure. Whether you're applying for a driving license or registering to vote or taxing a vehicle, you'll probably encounter a start page, which just introduces the service, and then a series of questions, and then a chance to review the information that you've given, and then a confirmation at the end once you've submitted the information. So they don't tend to vary too much from this. There are some small sort of differences, but usually this is a pretty common structure. And so apart from a few service specific nuances, this just works. It's been tried and tested many, many times over, and there's rarely a genuine need for it to change. So the gov.uk design system provides templates for all of the pages needed to construct this flow. And likewise, if you're on gov.uk, you really don't need these kind of things to be different. So in fact, if you're having to interact with government frequently, which many of us are at the moment, whether we like it or not, then having recognisable form inputs and notifications and error messages and calls to action is just going to help us get through them that bit more quickly. And so since the start of the COVID pandemic, and again, at the time that I wrote this talk, so it may be more now, GDS had shipped 5 new services. So that's over 60 individual web pages, all designed and built from scratch, and all of them have used the gov.uk design system. And one of these services was the Offer COVID-19 Support from Your Business service, which lets businesses tell the government how their organisation might be able to help in their response to the COVID pandemic. So the team that developed this service were able to start designing the service and get it into production in less than 4 days. And this service instantly became one of the most popular on gov.uk. So that's 4 days in the middle of a global crisis for a public sector organisation to make a service that takes potentially life-saving information and get it securely to authorities so that they can plan. And as you can imagine, in government, there are multiple layers of negotiation and fact-checking and sign-off that have to be carried out alongside the building of the digital service. So with so many new challenges to tackle, having a design system that provides reusable solutions to the common problems was really, really critical. So design systems provide a solid foundation which teams can use to move and learn quickly in times of crisis. And they give teams solutions to the common challenges, which leaves them free to concentrate on the new problems and the unprecedented circumstances. So just to reiterate, they can be incredibly complicated and sophisticated. They can also be really simple and unsophisticated in the way that they're executed. But what they do is pretty straightforward. They reduce waste by centralizing solutions and just taking away that duplication of effort. They support continuous improvement of our products and enable teams to move faster, increasing the speed with which we can build and test new products and features. And they also support continuous improvements of those teams themselves by eliminating knowledge silos and creating opportunities to share skills and experience across organizations through collaborative working. And finally, they improve agility. So they take care of the basics and the knowns so that teams can focus on adapting to change and solving new challenges when it really counts. And that's me. That's quite enough waffle, I think. I wasn't sure if I was going to get through all of that, but yes.
Wow,
15 minutes to spare.
Amy, an unrivaled presentation, to be fair.
Thanks.
Vast amounts of information there that I think everyone can absolutely take a lot from. Some of the guys in the group, particular Ollie, you can see his name, but you can't see his face. He was talking about this a few weeks ago, and having seen what you presented, you is a person sprung to mind, and you've just totally and utterly gone above and beyond what I thought you would do in terms of explaining what design systems do and their potential, more so than I even realised myself as well. And I've got a plethora of questions that I'm quite sure will not be sated by tonight. So I may be pestering on Twitter a little bit. But
please do. No, please do. I live for this. So
well, that way it shows. To be frank, it really shows. I suppose my first question from a personal point of view, because I'm gonna set the ball rolling, because sod it's my group and I organise it. I want to get
do what I like.
And in terms of so at Talk, we're in the formative. We basically flipped from being a sales-based operation to being a more human-centered operation as well, I suppose you say. With that becomes the need to be much more human-centered in our design and the way we talk to our customers and the way we respond. You mentioned there about the way the government responded very quickly to needs of their customers. We need to do the same sort of thing because telco is a very fast-moving business. So as we start, we've kind of started off with one guy going through the designs and collaborate. There's a lot of stuff going on in terms of what we put out there as a company, more than you probably even realise. In terms of the most basic formative design system team to kick off with, what would you recommend would be the minimal amount of people and what their roles would be?
It's really tricky because it definitely varies in terms of, like, the answer to that I think varies depending on the organisation size and maturity and where the sort of design is. So one thing to kind of say about gov.uk is that a lot of those design sort of fundamentals were already established. They just weren't documented and they weren't kind of shared in a reusable way. But we didn't have to come in and kind of create the brand as well as doing a design system and then, create the brand and then systematize it. And when I was at Babylon, it was different. We were trying to sort of establish those design conventions, I guess, whilst trying to create a design system to house them. And that's really hard because you're trying to sort of build a moving target, essentially. So I think that it does depend a little bit on a few sort of variables. But broadly speaking, like, I think you definitely need a developer, kind of systems-minded developer, front-end developer. Definitely need a designer involved. And I'm very biased, of course, because I am one, but I would definitely say a content designer or a technical writer as well, because language needs to be part of a design system just as much as the sort of visual side of things and the kind of interactions. And also, like, coming up with the right way to document those things for the designers and developers and the people that are going to be using the design system in your organization. It's just much easier to do if you do it up front. It's like anything, if you leave it until later in the process, then you have to try and find a way to sort of retrofit it and shoehorn it into what you've got. So I'd say those are the three sort of people that those are the three disciplines I think that need to be represented early on. And then I would also, I guess, add to that somebody to just oversee the work, because as you asked a question about kind of buy-in earlier, and that's something that's really tough with design systems, is getting stakeholders to buy into it and continue to fund it and support it. But also there is sometimes a little bit of organizational kind of resistance to design systems, because the idea that you're going to tell them how to design things, a lot of people sort of hear that and think you're stifling my creativity, and hopefully, as I've showed, it's not that at all. It's about getting the basics dealt with so that you can use your creativity in a much more valuable way, but people don't always see it that way. So kind of somebody to lead that work on the sort of engagement and the communication, and also to help prioritize, because design systems can be massive and very comprehensive. So in those early days, I think someone to help make decisions about what to do first and what not to do is really important. So yeah, I think my minimal starting team would be the delivery manager / product manager, somebody to sort of oversee the work, and those three disciplines accounted for.
Lovely to hear. I will go and report about that tomorrow and see what they say. I said, well, Amy said it, so it must be happening.
There you go. There is also a brilliant Nathan Curtis article about design system teams. Nathan Curtis, yeah. He was the consultant I mentioned earlier, who's written a blog post for everything, but he's written one about different design system teams at different stages of a design systems development. So that might be worth a read as well. Great.
Thanks for that. Has anyone else got any more questions at all? I'm sure there must be some. I can't believe there aren't. Katie's wiggling her hand.
I've got about 10, but
still lightning round.
Just a space starting from scratch. If you were to talk to kind of new designers, and I don't know, if they walk into a company for the first time, are there any tips for how would you get to grips with the design system? Do people always write a guide to support it? Does someone always take you through it? Do you just play around as a designer and figure out what's what? What would you kind of recommend for a designer walking into a new company to get to know it?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And sort of onboarding is something that I think isn't really talked about enough, because design systems, as sort of Giles mentioned at the beginning of this, they've started to become a little bit more prevalent now, I suppose. Like they tend to be a bit more common than they were a few years ago. But sometimes the assumption is that everybody has worked with one before, everybody knows like how they work, and that's definitely not the case at all. So I think that one of the things that's really important is to think about how to kind of integrate design system onboarding with general onboarding. So if I had the control over that side of things, I think I would definitely be thinking about ways of incorporating the design system into like early sort of training materials, whether there's any of that onboarding presentations or kind of activities that happen, and how we could incorporate that and help them to maybe try out sort of using it and stuff. And I think it's with design systems, kind of continuous engagement is really important, because even if you are familiar with design systems and you've worked with one before, as I kind of mentioned, the actual implementation of them can vary quite a lot, and the tools that they use and the way that they're kind of structured and stuff can be quite different from place to place. So I think making sure as a design system team that you're going out there and like working with designers and developers and the people who are using it regularly to make sure they know how it all works and stuff, I think is really important, and just documenting it really well. That's why I think kind of having a content person involved is really important, because making sure that you've explained everything clearly, and that a good design system I think should be somewhat self-explanatory, but yeah, too much knowledge is assumed, I think, so that's not always the case.
Anyone else for any questions?
I've got a question. I'm just thinking on a personal level. So I work for a digital marketing agency. I'm the only UX designer, and we work with a lot of startups. So I'm just thinking, like, at what level would you then convince a stakeholder or the, you know, your client to actually start implementing a design system when we may not necessarily have all those 4 people to support building it? And like, yeah, like with the budget as well, because our startups, well, we work with bigger clients as well, but a lot of our scope is startups, and their budget isn't as big as like, you know, Bernardo's or whatever would be. So yeah, that's my question.
I think that I think there are sort of different levels of design systems that you can kind of implement. So as a sort of start point, I would recommend that an organization has a kind of style guide in place, or something that just says these are the design conventions that we have, these are the ones that we know about. It's not particularly scalable, because it doesn't give people a means to kind of use it directly in products and stuff, and an easy way for you to update it without, you know, people having to sort of manually update the products. But it's definitely better than nothing. Like, it definitely sort of helps to establish that those kind of shared expectations and that consistency, and that kind of thing, I think can be done with just, you know, a designer, just sort of one person, like as long as they've got the time sort of within their role. And I would consider that kind of quite a core part of a designer's role, especially if they're one of the only ones in the organization. I think that they can I think they can sort of make a good start with that, and just sort of prioritizing, like, these are the things that we sort of most need to document. But it's hard. I don't think there's a kind of science to it. I think it's most of the time organizations will start to see the problems that occur from not having a design system, and that's what prompts them to think about having one. So they start to realize that they're duplicating a lot of effort, and they're wasting time and resources and stuff, solving the same problems over and over. And I guess a lot of the time, by the time they've got to that stage, they're slightly larger, and perhaps they have got a bit more money to think about investing in something like that.
Yeah, it's good to know that that's something that you can kind of promote to clients and businesses that you're working with, that it's going to save them so much money, time and energy. So yeah.
Another thing I will just add is there are a lot of pretty good sort of off the shelf tools now for various different bits of a design system. So I'm not on commission by them, I should say, but there is a tool called Zero Height, which gives you a kind of off the shelf design system documentation website, and it has like a tiered pricing plan, depending on how many people you need to be able to edit it and update it and stuff. But the lowest plan, I think, is not particularly expensive, and it lets you do things like, you know, you can just kind of plug in your, like, these are our colors, and these are our, like, this is our type stack, and these are our layouts and things, and it will just kind of package them up and display them for you in like a nice, neat way. And it's starting to get more sophisticated with like better integration with design tools and code and stuff like that. So there's a lot of things that you could kind of just get, you know, or even like the Gov UK design system is open source. Like, there's nothing to stop someone from, if you've got a kind of developer who knows what they're doing, from just like forking it and updating it to be relevant to that organization. So I would say, like, if resources are stretched, people can kind of consider just using what's already out there.
Thank you. Did you say that was Zero Height or high?
Zero Height, yeah. Height, yeah.
Yes.
Thanks for that, Amy. Interestingly enough, I mean, when we started putting our design system together, we've got basically one person putting it together. So it's been a very tricky one, hence some of my questions. But going back to what Helene just said, we recently identified that it's literally like, you want to create this all singing, all dancing design system that can plug into everything and it's all wonderful. But we started to realise it's better to go down a good, better, best mentality and go, okay, what's the good thing we should do at the moment? Well, let's look at what 60% of the components, or even just 20% of the design can manage 80% of the website. And then we document them as almost lift and grab components for designers. So you create a Figma board and goes, right, here's the, not even a design system. It's not like a pattern library. It's more like a style guide. and designers go in, grab the component, drag it onto their designs, manipulate it a little bit, check in to make sure it's okay, and then away they go.
Yeah.
And then that's almost like the first step. And I think that's what we've decided is the best way to approach it. And then as you get traction, let's say, within the industry and realize how effective it is, you get more resource, you get more buy-in, and you can go to better. And then you get and you can start to plug in automation and have all this great stuff going on. But it takes time. It takes time.
Yeah, it definitely does. And like one sort of thing I'll say is that a lot of people will kind of start with the artifacts of the system and think about, like, can we make a style guide or a pattern library or something like that. But in some places there's just as much value in thinking about kind of process/people first design systems. So before you've even started to document anything or started to kind of create stuff, you could think about just having like a regular kind of open space where people get together and like decide upon one version of a thing and share their ideas and share their work in the open, so that it kind of encourages and promotes that mentality of reuse and not reinventing the wheel. And that can be just as useful, I think, as starting by trying to kind of build a design system and create something.
Definitely. And so from our point of view, we have like the guys putting together has like a design drop-in session between 10 and 10:30 every morning. He has it in your diary, and if you drop in, he'll get an alert saying that you're online, and he'll join you, and you'll bring a requirement to him.
Mm-hmm.
This is the requirement. This is sort of my idea based on what you produced. How's that? And he'll go, yeah, that works well. Then he'll pop it into the design into the formative design system. And it's just, again, you mentioned earlier about sort of the collaborative designing in the open, and that's not a very basic way of doing that. But I think it is collaborative, and it is hard to you're never going to boil the ocean. You're never going to get it done and dusted in in 1 month or 2 months. I think I was speaking to a guy at the very group today whose design systems took about 4 years to even get to any decent level, and they're still formulating it. So it's a long-winded process.
Yeah, certainly not uncommon. I think they do take time, and they're never really done. You're always kind of evolving them. So yeah. Wonderful.
Well, thank you, Amy. Excellent.
Okay.
It's been really, really informative, and I'm sure everyone's got a huge amount out of it. Amy is quite active on Twitter. She has actively said that she's not the best on LinkedIn, so please don't expect to answer questions on that. But I'm sure she'll be happy to connect and speak to you and give you some advice as you go along.
Definitely.
And other than that, we'll let you go, Amy. We're going to put your video on YouTube, so it's accessible for those who couldn't attend the whole thing, which is great. And I hope everyone got a lot out of that. I know I certainly did. So
brilliant. Thanks very much, Amy.
Thanks so much.
No problem. Nice to meet you all. Have a nice evening. Thank you.
Thank you, Amy.
Thank you. Cheers.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thank you.
All right. Does everyone get a lot out of that? You can stay or you can go. It's up to you. I don't mind.
Yeah, that was amazing. Absolutely. Yeah, really, really well put together. And written lots of stuff down. So
good.
Great. Thanks for organising that, Giles.
That's not a problem at all. Not a problem at all. She's someone I've been trying to get for quite a while. She knows her stuff, and she's incredibly, she's one of the forefront of the design systems, which is quite a new thing, really. I mean, it's new in a sense that people are starting to adopt it, but it's been around for quite a while, kicking around in its sort of like formative benefits to companies. And I think she did a good job in presenting that. So hopefully you got a lot out of it, and you can all maybe escalate bits and bobs out of it. And follow on Twitter, talk to her, and hopefully you can take some stuff for your own learnings and for your own companies. It'll be good.
Absolutely, definitely.
Rob, what's the score, mate?
Losing 1-0.
And you had one eye on the football.
I love that you knew that that's what I was doing.
I knew.
I'd find to kind of look to the side, that gives it away.
Yeah, I've got it over here, just to the left hand side.
TV above, yeah.
Brilliant. Anyway, thank you all for attending. I'll let you all go now. Thank you all for the new people for attending as well and giving us your time. I'll send out invites to the group, and see you in 2 weeks' time, where hopefully we'll have Daria Lands presenting information architecture. predominantly focus on card sorting, which was requested. I can't remember who requested it, but someone did. So we'll go from there.
Yeah, cool.
Awesome. Thanks, Giles.
No problem.
Thank
Take care,
you.
everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers, guys.
Bye bye.
Take care.
Thank you.